Okay, so then Ellen, if you would unmute yourself and tell us if it's finished, unfinished, if it's meant to be hung on the wall, if what size it is, the materials, etc.
Yeah, it is a finished piece. It's about, oh golly, maybe 14 by 18, 18 wide, 14 high. I was playing around with trying to get more texture, and it's made out of tissue paper and paper napkins and cheesecloth that is sort of collaged wet onto fabric and then patterned with a gel medium.
Okay, so it's a mixed media fiber piece.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also quilted.
How big is it?
It's, let's see, it's about 14 high by maybe 18 wide. Whoops.
Okay.
I lost you.
Oh, well, we still have you. All right, so does anybody want to volunteer to start with one of the elements to describe texture, shape, line, color, or value? Nobody?
Lyric, I was
Karen.
Linda?
Yes, Linda in Ohio. I was struck at the wonderful balance, but that diagonal line going through it was just the first thing that took my eye.
Okay, so describe the lines you see. Line is one of the elements. So just describe where they are, how they're created, where they take your eye.
I'm looking at coming in from the lower left to the upper right. Those wonderful three lighter shapes could be flowers, but the texture around that takes your eye right up to the pink. It brings you back around the top and you see the diagonal line bringing you down to another balance of color, so that throughout the piece, the strong vertical moves your eye about the texture and balances the color. So I was struck with the way that happened during the creation of those diagonal lines.
Okay. That was a lot of other elements all in there with line. Does anybody else want to describe line that they see? Do you have anything to add?
This is Karen, and there are lines that the diagonal that she described, they're kind of straight, but then down in the lower right quadrant, they become curved lines. And I think that makes the piece richer.
All right, so we have diagonal lines from the lower left to the upper right. They're none of them are perfectly straight. They're all very organic, although they get more curved as you go to the lower right. The lines are created by bands of color. They are created by the where two edges of color meet. Some of the lines are an actual line of material, but very few of them are. So that's a really objective way to just describe the lines you see. Texture is a really dominant element here. Does anybody want to describe the element of texture for us? Do me a favor and raise your hand like this if you want to talk, and I'll call on you. Anybody? Anna?
I like the texture. I mean, there's just a lot of play of things coming out of the page, which actually brings a lot of movement to the piece with the texture. There's a lot of raised elements in the way she used the fabric and the paper.
So can you describe, if a blind person were looking at this with their fingers, could you describe what, if you were feeling it with your fingers and describing it to a blind person, how would you describe texture?
it has roughness to it. There's a lot of crevices and roughness, and if I was running my hand through it, there's a lot of movement to it through the textures. They go in and out, very hilly.
Okay, so there's actual three-dimensional depth to the texture. If you were feeling the piece, how would it feel on the lower right?
On the lower right, it'd be a little bit, it's more smoother, has a lot, it feels, well, it looks to me it's smoother, and
It's created with softer materials there,
yes,
larger chunks of it. How would it feel in the center?
in the center, it would feel very raised and with bits, the white of it sort of to me it feels like being in a pond, with feels like
Plant growth?
yeah,
Seaweed?
mangrove or even a lily pond where the flowers are popping out.
Okay. All right. It's funny. It's hard to boil all of the elements down to only talking about the elements. Because the way the elements are put together, they create a principle. They create movement. They create depth. They create those things because of the texture. So I would say the texture here is created by taking little bits of found elements, mushing them together. They probably feel a little bit hardened in the center bunches because of the gel medium over them, but you get the idea of the softness of fiber, the softness of cheesecloth, the softness of fabric, the softness of tissue, all the little stringy bits. Some are tied in and some look loose, but then you have clumps of shredded little bits of material that create a more bunched up texture. So that is a way to talk a little bit more about just texture. And it is really hard to just stick to the elements and not use judgment words as either, like I like, or it makes me feel this way. We'll talk about those, I promise, because those are good. But sometimes it's really helpful to be as objective as we possibly can. Let's talk about the element of color, meaning just describe the colors you see and where they are. Does anybody want to wave their hand at me and talk about color? You have a tank top on and you've got your hand raised and you have glasses, but you don't have a name.
Casey.
Casey, thank you.
I just unmuted myself. The color I see is green and blue, white, purple, a red, golden yellow a bit.
Okay, so how much of those colors are in there and where are they placed and how do they relate to each other?
The green and blue are at the lower right and work well together. So we're not discussing values, so it's not what
you know what, it's almost impossible not to talk about value with color because the color has value, so let's talk about value and color together.
Okay, I was just going to say that to me the white obviously pops out because of the value, but the green is also it comes out because it's a lighter color than the blue, so it sort of creates depth using value in the color in the bottom right. The colors in the upper left have more of, to me, even the white up there is a little bit brighter even than the white that is in the longer patch in the bottom. It seems to be, to me, brighter. And there's actually some black woven through too, which also adds depth. And
Okay.
that's it for color.
Okay, so if I were describing color and value, I would say the lower right quadrant is analogous green and blue. That's why they work so well together, because they're next to each other. It goes to a deeper value at the very bottom corner. And then through the center, especially starting on the lower left, there are very high value areas that are kind of pinkish, white, red. And red is across from the green and blue, so it's kind of maybe a split complementary. There are little tiny bits of yellow in there that add a little bit of spark. And then because there's a deep value blue-black stripe right above the center clump, there's a lot of value contrast right there. And then as you move it, again, it's a low value green-blue, and then you move towards the upper left, and the colors are more high value, again, green and blue, but a lot of the red, pink, white with a little yellow thrown in up there. So that's the description of color and value. Does anybody want to wave their hand at me and talk about shape? I think is the only one we haven't described. I don't see anybody waving their hand. Lynn Harris, do you want to give us a rundown of shape? Harold, sorry.
Oh, you talking to me?
Yep, I'm talking to you, Lynn. I got your name almost right, but not quite.
Okay. Well, there are curvilinear shapes in the lower right quadrant, and they morph and change into more round shapes in the center and a little bit up in the upper left-hand side. And there's more curvilinear shapes, well, throughout the piece, and it acts as a background, whereas the more rounded shapes are the subject.
Okay, so they feel like subject and foreground. The rounded shapes feel like foreground, and the curvilinear shapes feel like background.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, so that's kind of just a really objective rundown, a description of how the elements work. And then we get into how successfully and how just how they're working together to create the composition. We can say that the balance of this piece, and balance is symmetry, asymmetry, what kind of symmetry. It feels hard to describe. It's not like a perfectly symmetrical piece, but if we created a line from the upper left to the lower right, there would be a central circle right in the middle of the piece that feels like a focal point, right? And it feels pretty visually balanced to the left and right of that diagonal line. Although on the left lower side, we have a larger whitish light value area, and on the higher right side, we have a red point of emphasis that draws your eye, and a little white point of emphasis kind of right above the center, in the center upper part of the work. So even though it's technically asymmetrical, it feels very on the verge of being symmetrical on a diagonal. The feeling of movement that we get from this is caused by the complexity of the organic lines and shapes and the way they move all on a diagonal. The focal point would be the main area in the center, the white conglomeration of little bits. And there are other high value or different color points around the piece that draw your eye from one place to another as points of emphasis. It has a very organic feeling of movement, although it's not super smooth. Your eye just doesn't slide through the piece. There's so much complex texture that your eye is stopped again and again and again as it moves around the piece. So it kind of, Anna's ideas are stuck in my head, so I'm thinking of like trying to move through a swampy, weedy mangrove kind of watery place. It's not uninhibited, but at the same time, it's interesting and complex and beautiful. Does anybody else have something they want to say about the composition, about how the elements come together to create the principles? And we've talked about we haven't talked about unity and variety. We've talked about balance and symmetry, movement. I'm having a blank. So a few other things. Does anybody else want to say anything about unity, repetition, variety, depth, rhythm, motion, any of those things? Okay, I don't see anybody. We will wrap this one up then by having our artist come back on. And well, first, a question for all of you. For all of you, this is where I really enjoy this part of an analysis process. Does this remind you of anything? Does this bring up any emotions? Renee? Renee?
I forgot I was muted.
There you go.
When I first glanced at this, it reminds me of like a Monet, the impressionistic style with the lily pads, and it just is. I find it very pleasing to look at, even though it is a very there's an even quality to it, even though it's a very uneven in colors, in style, and but that was my first thought at looking at it, just the way your eyes move around and want to dance.
So it gives you the idea and the feeling and a reference to the kind of things you think of and feel when you see a Monet. Very nice. Yeah. Anybody else? I don't see anybody waving their hand. All right, artist, again?
Yeah. And am I muted or unmuted?
We can hear you, Ellen.
Okay, good, good. Well, Renee hit it right on the head. I actually had some party napkins that were the Lily Pond at Giverny by Monet, his painting. And I thought, gee, it would be nice to see if I could work some, some texture into it, particularly trying to mimic brush strokes. So nice. Instead of going for a calm day on the Lily Pond, I figured it was a windy day and the water was kind of rippling.
Very nice.
So
do you have anything that you learned in this piece, or any surprises, or anything that you very shortly and quickly want to tell us about before we move on to the next piece?
Well, I learned a new technique that I had a lot of fun with. Made a big mess, but it was a lot of fun doing it. And yeah, I guess as much as anything, it's hard not to get bound up in technique. And I had to stop several times and get back to what is it looking like? What's the design? What's the composition? So, but it was a lot of fun.
All right, good. Okay, Julie, tell us the facts about this piece. Is it, what size is it? Is it a finished piece? Is it in process?
It is in process. Size is about 18 by 22. It's a rust dyed cotton fabric overlaid with some dyed cheesecloth and a lot of embroidery. There's some purchased fabric there in a few spots, but most of it is dyed fabric that I had and embroidery.
Okay. I was distracted trying to find which picture you were in. Is it finished or unfinished, and what
It
side?
is. I say it's not finished.
Okay.
It's been a long process.
All right. Do you have a size for us? How
Yeah,
large?
18 by 22.
18. You did say that.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So everybody who wants to go through texture, shape, line, color, or value, wave your hand at me really big as I scroll through all your pictures. Nobody's waving hands. Renee. Renee, what element,
So-
texture, shape, line, or color or value stands out to you?
So I can do texture because I can actually see texture better on this one.
Okay.
Texture ranges from a smooth, finished to a more rough, open weave fabric. The outside of the project is smooth. It appears to go all the way around, and then in the on both sides of the middle, there's smooth areas again. And then there's also texture added with the elements of embroidery with the French knots, what appear to be French knots, and the embroidery around some of the design work.
Okay. Very good. It's a good description of texture. Just how would it feel as you touch it, and what creates that feeling. Who wants to talk about color and value here? Casey, do you want to give it a try?
I'll try. The color and value, obviously the red is a dominant color that stands out, and it's the value. So it's not. It's almost analogous, I would say, to the rust underneath it. There's not really any complementary colors in here. It's all, to me, somewhat analogous with red rust going down to cream brown, with shots of black in it, which I guess would be black. Oh, okay. What is black considered?
I consider them neutrals. So a lot of
Okay.
time, and neutral is a really flexible term. So
Okay.
it goes from black and white here, which are neutrals. And a lot of times the brown beiges can be called a neutral. In this piece, you're right, it does feel a little bit analogous because the rust is that,
Almost a
that
pinky red.
terracotta dark brown orange next to the red. But it can also be considered a neutral on the continuum between the cream to the dark brown.
Yeah.
Tell me about value. Where is it? What is it? And how does it contrast?
The value is definitely in the red explosions coming out either side, being, just so that the red against the cream.
Is there a high contrast or low contrast here?
Oh, very high contrast.
Very
It's high contrast between the red, and more so even at, in certain places at the top left than the bottom. There's contrast definitely between the black lines coming in and into the white from the sides, and the stitching is actually high contrast.
Okay.
So you see that the stitching stands out due to the contrast.
Right.
Around
and that
the
leads
piece.
us into the element of line. Would anybody like to just describe the lines they see here and how they're created? Let's go with somebody. Can I call on somebody whose video is off? Carla? Do you want to give it a try?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, this is Carla.
Hi.
Hi. Well, to me, the lines are curvy. They're not straight. They are a little straighter around the dagger type things, the black on the sides. The lines have a lot of jagged components to them. Some are smooth, some are more jagged.
Right. So one thing you could say is that the stitching creates an outline around the jaggedy shape all around the center, right?
Yes.
And then how would you describe, there's so many different kinds of lines here, and
True.
they're not all just solid. Think of all the different kinds of lines you can have. There's interrupted lines and dotted lines and straight lines.
Yeah, I think it's because the picture may be cut off a little, but I noticed around the border, there's the basting line that doesn't go all the way around because it might be cut off. But then there's the dots, and there's the embroidery, the stem stitch or whatever that goes straight through. I mean, you know, like it's a completely covered line. And then there's the dashes that you see, like at the top, there's the 3 sections of black that have all the little dashes in there. Those are all lines.
Very good. Right. And line kind of has the job of leading the eye around the work. In this, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about shape because line leads right into shape in this piece. We've got the outline that's open at the top of all of these shapes. That line encloses them and implies that all of those shapes are part of one shape, even though it's open at the top. And then you've got the collections of running stitch that are bunched together that create shapes that let the eye jump from one place to the other. You have the lines, the 3 lines on both the left and the right side that, because they're very narrow in the center, become an arrow that points your eye inward. And because they're parallel with each other and they point to each other, your mind kind of completes 3 lines behind this work, even though they're interrupted. And then the dotted lines of the French knots echo the shape of the central piece, and they also echo and reinforce the shape of the black lines that are parallel coming in from the sides. And it's you have a few shapes that are escaping up the top. Most of those collections of running stitches that create shapes are inside of the large central jaggedy organic shape, but they're escaping out that opening at the top. And they're gathered at the top instead of at the bottom. So that's kind of texture, shape, line, color, value, all a rundown of all of them, just describing what we see. You know, there's no judgment, there's no this is good or bad or in the right place or wrong place. It's just describing each of those elements, where they are. And now let's talk a little bit about what they're doing. So is there, Karen, I see you waving.
Just have a question. Like the French knots, would we describe that as a broken line or an implied line? What's the difference? When is something an implied line?
Implied line is a line that isn't really there physically. So those big black lines going through the 3 coming from either side, because they point to each other, that's more of an implied line. The eye completes a line behind the main shape, right?
Yes.
But it's not actually there. Now the French knots, that's something you can actually see on the piece. Your mind doesn't have to make it up. It's a dotted line, a disconnected line, but because they march in a linear way, they are little bits of texture, little tiny circular shapes that become a line. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let's talk about unity. Unity is where everything is in visual harmony. All the elements look like they belong there. Nothing really looks out of place, unless, of course, the artist wants to make you feel unease and feel like something really is there out of place on purpose. Does anybody want to describe how this piece is creating a feeling of unity, visual harmony?
Lyric, this is Laura.
Laura, go for it.
In New Orleans, so anyway, the repetition of that deep red, well, the repetition of the colors and the shapes give unity.
Mhm.
I actually found that the cheesecloth creates it calls to mind a grid. And when I think of grids, I think of order.
Mhm.
But clearly this order has been busted up a little bit. Because cheesecloth, of course, is fragile.
Mhm.
But what do I want to say?
So unity is often created through repetition of an element. So we've got the repetition of the red, the repetition of the lines. We've got the cheesecloth that underlays the red but covers outside of those lines. So that texture, that grid that you were talking about, is a unifying element of texture that kind of holds all these disparate elements together.
And then the repetition of the embroidery stitches. And
Mhm. And it's interesting that it's a very limited color palette, right? There's not there's not a huge variety of shapes. You've got the red jaggedy shapes, and then the shape of the dotted lines kind of repeats the outside of that. You've got the big black linear shapes on the outside. So keeping both the palette and the kinds of stitches and this is in one way a very limited quiet piece, and another way a very active loud piece. So you've got high visual contrast because of value contrast. You've got very active shapes and lines that move your eye all over the place. Does anything feel like it's out of place, Laura?
the center, I don't know. It's like the way it's well, I don't know. At first, I wasn't sure, but then it also creates a lot of movement, because it points your eye towards like an arrow, and of course, it throws your eye to those running stitches at the top that look like they are escaping the organism. To me, I mean, I feel like I'm looking under a microscope. I'm sorry, I sort of forgot the question. I love the
It's good. Does anything feel out of place? And you brought up some really good things. When I first looked at this, I was wondering, with the gap on the top of that line, is it finished or is it not finished? And it's especially noticeable because of that center line that creates a shape that points your eye up the center of the big shape. But then having those other collections of running stitches kind of floating out of that opening, the longer I look at it, the longer it's like, well, I guess it's good. Well, not good or bad, just I guess that it provides an opening for the eye to leave the center shape. Yeah, Laura?
Yeah, and then the black lines on the side help to contain, that bright, I hesitate to use, I don't know, reddish maroon color. The shape is, in other words, it forms a boundary, those
right
black lines.
And that boundary points the eyes in, and the dotted lines that echo the stitch line, the French knots, also again enclose it. And let's go right into balance and symmetry, because in this case, it feels very much symmetrically balanced, right? Casey?
I was going to agree. I was going to say it's so symmetrically balanced that it almost looks like a Rorschach test or something that you
The ink blot folded in half screen.
yeah. It's just when I first looked at it, I was like, oh, that was kind of an impression I got. So very symmetrical, you know, just every line, you know, the black lines are echoed, right down the middle.
Right. And because this piece is balanced very symmetrically, it tones down the visual activity. Anytime you have symmetry, especially around a central axis, especially a central vertical axis, you have a more formal composition. It quiets it down. Even though the shapes in this piece are exploding outward, the colors are in that red is an intense thing. The patterning in the red is intense and vibrant. That create, I mean, those things all create this really amazing outward movement, but then everything else around it brings it back in and keeps it from being entirely chaotic. All right, does anybody have a thing that they want to say? How does this make them feel? What does this remind you of? We still have more to go.
I do.
Lyric?
Yes?
Linda in Columbus, Ohio. I was reminded of the rock strata formations of southern Utah. There's a balance to the linear quality, but I believe that the creator said it was hand-dyed, eco-dyed, so you created that rust and highlighted, because those of us who do lots of dyeing know you can't always control that. The resist is there. You've done it with your lines, but it just looked to me like the strata of a national park in southern Utah.
Oh, yes.
This is Melanie, and I'm sorry I was tuning in late. I was like,
no worries.
I'm missing it. Oh, so just looking at this piece, to me, it seems like the shading on the rust in each little pod, plus the black, gives it a lot of depth and makes it look like it really is rounded figures in there. Y'all may have said that earlier, but I find that just the coloring of the little hand stitching in black and the rust shading and with the white, it really gives it a lot of depth.
Okay. And value does that. Value gives the illusion of dimension and depth.
Yes.
Because light tends to reflect and come forward, and shadows tend to come away from the eye.
And then the other thing that adds to it is the black curved is inside the red. And
Very good. Very good. Does our artist have anything she wants to say about this? Any short insights that you had while you were creating it? Any more questions for the audience?
This is unlike anything I would ever make in my life, but I was really disturbed when everything got shut down by COVID, and then also the George Floyd incident, because we're in the Minneapolis metro area. And this is not a pleasant piece, but I just had to do something, and this is what came out. And now I don't know what to do with it, but I can keep working on your comments.
Yeah, and it can be just something that had to be made to process the way you were feeling about things.
Right.
Totally, every piece that you make doesn't have to have a final purpose or destination, other than that it was something you had to do or learn from or process.
Okay, thank you all.
Very good. Let's go through this one. Campbell? K. I don't have the first name on it.
Hey.
It is K. Okay.
You're right.
All right. All right. Kay, tell us how large this is. We can't see the edges, so we don't know if...
I think you have it all.
Okay.
It's 27 by 19. It is finished and it is for the wall. I
Okay.
hope.
All right. And other facts that we can say about pieces are this is abstract, not necessarily representational without further information from the artist. It's a textile, commercial fabrics, or it's sewn fabrics, and it's a quilt.
It's commercial and some hand dyed.
Okay, good. Who wants to just describe the color here? Color and value together. Darcy, do you want to give it a try?
I would be happy to. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Here, I'll even let you look at me.
All right, give us a rundown of the color and value.
Okay, so the color is blue and it's a gradation from dark blue to lighter blue to green to no blue.
All right, and at the top we see yellow as well. It goes from blue to blue-green to yellow.
Correct.
Line monitor. Do you, what color scheme? This is an actual piece that very neatly fits into a color scheme.
Monochromatic.
No, because we have yellow and green and blue. So those are three different names of three different colors.
Analogous.
There you go. Yay. You got it. And describe the value, the dark or the light. Just where are they? What are they doing?
Well, as I said, it's a gradation. So the value is, it's a intense value on the bottom. And as you go up, it gets less and less.
Okay, so it's low value on the bottom, high value on the top. It's a gradation both of color and of value. So gradation can mean dark to light. Gradation can also be from one color to the next, whether it's dark or light or not.
Yes.
Very good. So the value on the bottom gives us a feeling of heaviness, right?
Yes, and I would assume that's what the artist wants us to feel.
You know, when you're looking at a piece, when I'm looking at a piece, other people can do this differently. I don't take the artist's feelings of what I want to feel into account at all, because the piece is the piece, right? The piece is what it is, and the viewer is the viewer. So the viewer brings to it whatever they have. If the artist is standing there, then the artist can tell you what they mean.
So you should not, you should just explain how the piece makes you feel and not take into consideration what you think the artist is trying to say.
Yeah, don't try to second guess them unless you're reading an artist statement right there. And this is a very subjective thing. This is just one of the ways during a critique session that I personally come to a piece. We can't know the artist's mind, so I don't try. You know, I don't take into account during the critique. I mean, it's totally different for every person, and especially when it's not in the middle of a critique, right? The way I run a critique is that we just objectively describe what the elements and principles are doing to start with. And then you can get into maybe the artist thought this, or I feel this way. And since we have the artist here, the artist can tell us how they feel later. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, let's go through the next value of line. Anybody want to raise their, Melanie, have you had a turn to speak up? Just describe lines, Melanie.
Okay, I had to unmute. The lines in this makes makes me feel like I'm in deep water. So it looks like I'm on, the closer I am to it on the front is calmer, but there are some big swells in this water I see as water.
Okay, can you describe the kind of lines you see? Like, are they diagonal, horizontal, vertical? What's making the lines? Are they light or
They're
heavy?
horizontal, and the graduation of color gives you a feel of depth of the line, but the curve of the line going across, it gets curvier as it goes to the top.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, so that's a really good way to say it. We've got predominantly horizontal lines. We've got lines between the blocks of color. The lines get curvier as they raise in the frame. And then we've also got different kinds of ways lines are being created here. Like on the bottom, those lines are just created by the stitching and the quilting by thread. And sometimes there's space between those stitchings, so the lines of fabric feel wider, and then they get narrower. There's also 3 very light colors of threads that I can see in the bottom. And then in the central part, we've got what look like cording. They've got heavy dimensional lines going across. Can you see those?
Yes.
So those are heavier lines, even though it's a lighter value, a medium value, they're dimensional, so they stand out. And then as you go up, farther up, the dimensionality of it tones back down until we're back to just yellow on yellow stitched lines, but they curve. Again, the movement is predominantly horizontal. I'm seeing a big X in the middle, and I'm thinking that's just like a fold line or something. It doesn't look like it's stitched, but it's drawn my attention several times, the X. And I think it is just a fold line as I look at it really closely. Okay, so color value line.
One other line. One line is right in the center. There's a couple of places where it was, when it was sewn, it was not exactly down tight. And I like that line that goes horizontal. It caused from the wrinkles in the fabric. You see that in the middle?
Yeah.
Next to the corded. It almost indicates a wave that might be going a different direction in the wind or something. I don't know.
Interesting. Very good. Color value texture is all very smooth, just created by the fabrics. Although if I close my eyes and ran my hand over it, it would be smoother on the top and the bottom, and then it would get very dimensional with those ropey lines in the center. So more and more dimensional toward the center and flat as you go out. Okay, does anybody want to talk about unity, focal point, balance, any of the principles? Just speak up.
Well, there's a suggestion of perspective. At the top, the quilting lines are further apart, and as they approach the green, they get closer and closer together, which gives you a sense of perspective and distance. And the same thing happens at the bottom, where the blue is quilted with further apart lines, and as it approaches the lighter blue, they get closer and closer together.
So in a way, it gives you a reference to a horizon line.
Yes.
So the horizon would be more in the center, and the top would be coming towards you, and the bottom would be coming towards you in a landscape.
Yes, it gives you a landscape feel, or looking at mountains, looking at water. It just gives you a feel of perspective, and it draws your eye to the center, both from the top and the bottom, in a very subtle way.
Very good. That's an interesting, very subtle way that perspective can lead your eye into the work. Does anybody else want to describe anything else about the piece? Movement, depth and dimension you just talked about. I don't see anything unbalanced. There's no really strong focal point, but because it's just a little bit different than the rest, halfway up, just under the halfway point, you have the first corded ropey dimensional line. And then there's 2 bits of green tucked in there. And those, whereas everywhere else, the colors blend much more smoothly. So the eye is drawn to those green bits surrounded by blue, even though they're so linear that the eye is only resting there. So I wouldn't call them necessarily a focal point, but a point of emphasis. And then the lines direct the eye farther and carry you on. Let's have our artist tell us about the piece. Kay,
Hello,
did you learn anything during making it?
This was a total experiment. And as you mentioned, the lines you see, the X, are construction error, maybe. It was basted, and then because of my techniques, they were hard to get out. So yeah, but yeah, this is, the title is, as some people might have suggested, is From the Sea. And I was trying to make this fluid and suggesting of the calmness of the sea, and with some, and I find most pictures of the sea are looking from the land out, and I wanted to do it in the opposite direction.
Interesting. That is interesting. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Look at what we've got going on here. Is Diane still with us? I think she's left us, so maybe we'll keep hers for next time. I'm sorry that we weren't able to work on her piece while she was here. So thank you very much, everybody, for the group critique. Does anybody have a comment about, in general, about what you might have learned about critique? Did you get any insights? Did you learn anything over this hour through this process? Darcy? Darcy, then Anna.
I like the way that we take an image of a piece and break it down. And we're able to look at it element by element and be more, develop a language about it, as well as being able to critique without
Judgment.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So the point of this particular process, and again, there's no one, this is the only right way to do a thing, but the point of this critique process is to gain fresh eyes in looking at the artwork, whether it's yours or somebody else's. If you go through each element and then through the principles and just break it down and describe what you see, sometimes just verbalizing it helps you see it more clearly.
Yes.
Anna, what were you going to say?
I like looking at things intuitive, and what you're helping me to do is to put the principles into verbal form. Okay, you know, we all see things intuitive, but to understand the principles in the intellect aspect of it really helps to understand the art, and you really are helping me with that. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, again, there's different ways that everybody comes to the art, but in a learning process, which critique should be, right? That's why we critique, so that we can learn how the artwork is functioning, how the composition is working or not working. That judgment is up to the artist. And up to each individual viewer, and the two are two separate things, right? If it works for the artist, then that's what it is. And if it doesn't work for the viewer, then the artist can choose to take that in or not. It's entirely up to the artist. But by running through the elements and principles and verbalizing what they're doing, having this vocabulary, all it's doing is giving us a set of lenses to look through more clearly in a different way. So when you're creating your own work, no matter what work that is, if this is when it gets useful to, you run into a block of some sort, step back, give it space, give it time, look at it from afar, but go through the elements, break it down objectively like this, and even talk to yourself, and you'll find that you're able to see what's working and what's not working just by describing exactly what you see. When we're creating things, we get so close to them that we completely don't see things that are happening, right? When you do that, one of the most important things that everybody forgets is value. Break down where the value is, what the high value and low value, and where there's contrast or not enough contrast. That's a lot of times where we get hung up, where a composition is or is not working, and that will help you. So thank you very much for being here. I will post this to the Facebook group. Is anybody here not on the Facebook group? Lynn and Kay, who remembers what it's called? I'm going to share my screen and we'll go there so that you can.
It's called The Artist's Eye.
I think you're right.
A Facebook group, yeah.
Yeah, it's a private Facebook group, so you have to search for it. Oh, it was right there, even though I spelled. The Artist's Eyes Group Critique with Lyric. So I'm going to paste this into the chat function so that you can copy and paste it. Everybody got that? Oh, no, it just went to Anna, sorry. Let's try everyone. Okay, there it is. All right, so you can copy and paste that. I have to approve you to the group, and I only do that for people who answer the actual questions there. So answer the questions. And if I don't approve you within a day, it's because I forgot to look at it. So send me an email. But I'll post this there, and then I'll probably post a better edited version publicly.
800-63250-3795.
Whoa. 323.
You can also just go to Facebook and search The Artist's Eye.
Yeah.
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 That's probably easier than writing down all those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I was unmuted during that.
No worries. I was just really impressed because I don't even try to write numbers down like that because I'll juxtapose them and get them wrong every time. All right. So I don't have plans right now to do another one of these in the next month because my schedule has gone whoosh.
Good.
Good. Yeah,
very good.
Good for you.
Feel free to come watch next Wednesday and the Wednesday after that. Just go to globalquiltconnection.com. I'm running, Sue Bleiweiss and I are running a Meet the Teacher webinar. And you can register to watch it there. And when you log on, you'll probably, because there's so many people registered, get shipped straight to a YouTube live stream of it. But you can chat and ask questions there or in the other place. And it's just mostly teachers that are presenting their virtual offerings to guilds who are ready to hire it. It's not demonstrations of this is how I do something. It's this is what I do, hire me. So if you're interested, go over to there. That's what I'm spending most of my time doing. All right. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keep an eye out on the Facebook group, and please make it, whatever you put into it is what you'll get out of it. So put up work, ask for critique, comment on everybody's stuff there. Eventually, I'd love to have that be a really active, really valuable critique place for y'all. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good lesson.
Thank you for watching. Leave a comment and let's have a conversation. I would also love it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel or check out lyrickinard.com where you can find wonderful art and textile related things. Bye for now.